some of the aspects around dementia and other support for elderly patients. So we're taking specific units of competency from an Australian qualification and delivering that to their Indian partner. They've just signed another partnership in the beauty industry for a company linked to the L'Oreal group here in India. So that is a typical Australian model of fairly low numbers and a high cost for that qualification. And you'll hear about other examples in the next panel session, including XLT training. The second is where an ACPET member institution looks to set up here in India with an Indian partner, typically an education provider, and they would offer a mix of accredited and non-accredited training as the Indian education partner and their business partners are looking for. And even that non-accredited training draws from the expertise and experience of the training provider and their knowledge that they draw from Australia. And again, you'll hear an example from an ACPET member institution, the Australian Retail College, who's pursued that opportunity. There are many others. I'm constantly surprised by what my membership does. One of our leading Queensland providers has been delivering training online in India for more than a decade. And that is deliberately targeted to the needs of Indian businesses. We're grateful to the NSDC. We had a number of meetings earlier this week with Indian education partners of the NSDC, and I expect that we'll see more of those opportunities, and that training will increasingly be linked to India's national occupation standards. And the third, and again you'll have an example in the next panel when Ravi speaks from AAMC, and that's where a more generalist Australian provider with a number of different areas of expertise sets up an Indian venture, does the hard work to build the partnerships, can secure contracts and funding typically from Indian state governments, businesses and with other Indian education partners. When they've been here for 2 or 3 years, typically they will then look to expand. They've got demand for training in areas that they don't have any expertise in, and they're looking for Australian partners. So typically the latter two work on a higher volume and lower cost, and you'll hear different examples of how providers have dealt with those challenges. And just finally to note how delighted I was to be asked by some of the people behind the Indian Association of Skilled Training Providers. They're just setting up, I guess, an ACPET equivalent here in India, and we're very keen to work with them as they go through some of the challenges and looking at the opportunities that association will bring.
So thank you very much, Claire, and I think they call themselves the Indian Association of Quality Training Providers, but and that's key in the context that discussion we are having. So Peter actually wears 2 hats, but the hat that he's wearing here is the director of the TAFEs, the directors group, which has been doing some interesting work in India, and I think it's over to you to show what you're doing and how it fits into this whole overall framework.
Thanks very much, Dilip. Yes, we've been involved in a number of activities here in India. Initially, obviously, through our member institutes, we've identified at least 28 partnerships, active partnerships, and as Claire said, in various types of models. Predominantly, our institutes are working directly with the corporate sector in India, as compared with India, where most of our partnerships focus around institution-to-institution partnerships. In addition, we've been very grateful to both the Australian and the Indian governments for supporting a piloting of a leadership program for the vocational training sector leaders here in India. So initially it focused on providing a leadership program in Australia for the directors of teacher training institutes in India. And the other day I was with the University Grants Commission, and their focus is now moving towards the new community college model that they're looking to set up. But I thought I might just return to the theme of this session, which is how do our institutes connect with industry? One of the pieces of work we've been doing over the last year has been for the British Commonwealth, where they asked us to compare vocational training systems in 5 Commonwealth countries and to try and identify where their priorities might be. So that was a huge challenge. The countries were quite varied both in their stages of development and their priorities. So what we did, we ended up identifying 5 key areas that make a strong vocational training system. And as I go through them, you'll understand where the importance of that connection with industry is absolutely critical. And both Bob and the other speakers already have emphasised the importance of making our training relevant to industry needs. The first key feature that we looked at was around governance and funding. There needs to be effective governance and there needs to be coordinating funding, both at a national, a state and a local level. And particularly in the area of governance for our institutes, our boards contain industry representatives. They are an integral part of the decision making that happens at a local institute level. And obviously as we move further up the scale, it's critical that industry has a voice on a range of stakeholder engagements and various policy bodies. And the second area we identified was industry engagement, making sure that we, in the vocational training sector, are listening to what industry needs now and what they need in the future. And for us in Australia, the skills councils play a critical role in that with their environmental scans where they predict labour movements and skill shortages, as well as providing us with the occupational standards that guide and inform the training that we deliver. The third area was around moving our training away from an academic base to an outcomes base on the principle of what skills and knowledge do you need to do these jobs. And again, industry plays a key role, not just through the ISCs, but also in providing, in many cases, the teachers and the opportunities for our students to learn and carry out their activities actually in the workplace. The next area was around qualifications framework, and Di will talk more about that. But having one single framework which enables pathways between the different sectors has been absolutely critical to us. And it's been critical to industry. As Bob mentioned, in the 1980s we had 8 different systems, 8 different qualifications, and I mean industry had no idea what qualification they should be looking for when they advertise jobs. So we now have that coordinated approach and it makes a huge difference. The other area is in the quality of the providers themselves. And again, industry guides us in terms of what they look for. That mix of learning within an institution and practical work experience, either in the workplace where possible or certainly through scenarios and other forms within the college. The final area obviously is in teaching and delivering of of our training. And again, industry plays a key part. In our colleges, we have people from companies and businesses talk to our students. In fact, given that the majority of our teachers are part-time, many of them are working in the industry at the same time as they're coming to lecture our students. So there's a direct involvement at the grassroots level. Also, we engage with industry as they demand a more flexible approach to delivery. So we look for ways of incorporating new technologies, whether it's e-learning platforms or self-paced technologies. And again, it's only through talking to industry do we understand the opportunities and the value of using those particular approaches. So I think we've learnt a huge amount over since the 80s when we moved out of that institutional base where our doors were locked and industry couldn't get in and we didn't get out, to a situation now where on the stage you have training providers, you have people from industry and throughout this audience as well. We've certainly got our challenges. We're not pretending it's all perfect. I might put in a bit, particularly around the area of governance and funding. We have some stresses and strains within our system about effective policies both at a national and a state level. So we're not pretending everything's fine, but we certainly believe that we can share a lot of our lessons and a lot of mistakes that we've made and help the people here achieve what took us 30 years, and you're trying to do it in less than half that time. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter. We benefited a lot from your experiences, particularly the qualification framework, the outcomes, and the quality of providers. I think is a very important point that you mentioned, and how the programs are delivered. Of course, the financing part that was mentioned by our friend Gayatri, that is also very important in India, and particularly for the government. May I now request Mr. Anil Weldon to give his point.
Thank you. Thank you. I've been to quite a few conferences. I get a feeling of deja vu sitting at conferences like this sometimes. I think we've been here before. But I was at a conference once where somebody in the audience, we were trying to convince the audience that employers that they needed to train. And somebody jumped up and said, well, if I train them, they're likely to leave. And somebody was in the back who was obviously experienced at this sort of thing, I think he was a baker by trade, and he said, well, if you don't train them, they might stay. And that was the biggest issue of all, because that's what employers really twigged to the fact that if you don't get involved in this game of training, you're going to end up with people you don't really want. So Hutchison Builders has certainly got on the bandwagon in terms of assuming a role of developing its own people. So employers, I think in Australia, are no different to anywhere else, and especially in India, we're generated by one particular thing, and that's profit. We've got to make profit. Without profit, we don't survive. Our workforce development program, and hence the skills that are generated by that, should be focused on developing the company's ability to make profits. Now, in construction, that's pretty simple. It's not a very complicated model in construction. Really, it boils down to three elements. We've got to actually deliver projects on budget, we've got to deliver them on time, and hopefully deliver them with zero defects. If we do all those three things, we inevitably make money. When you start to break that simple process down, you start to put a context around why you have a workforce development team, why you do what you do, why you engage with RTOs, why you train. If you don't have that context, you're just training for training's sake, and you're in danger of slipping into that supply-driven mode that Australia was initially in many years ago. So our training program, and we have our own training organisation within the company, it's what they call an enterprise-based registered training organisation, focuses on, I suppose, 5 key themes, and that is attracting the right people and giving them the pre-trade training they need to be able to select whether they're the right people for the job or not, because in Australia we have quite a high cancellation rate of something like 40-odd% in our apprenticeships, whereas in Hutchison Builders we have a cancellation rate of less than 2%. So attracting the right people is part of the deal. The next part is training them. If you don't train them right, and we certainly train them through our program, through our system, using our resources, so it's fully contextualised. We also then focus on retaining them, because what's the point of training them if we don't retain them? So training and workforce development is part of that retention strategy. And finally, we need to maintain those skills as well, because if we don't maintain the skills, then we lose all the advantage we've gained. And finally, I have to, because I run a registered training organisation, we've got to make money, otherwise we won't sustain ourselves, and if we don't sustain the process, then the whole process collapses. So it's a pretty simple exercise in the long run, as long as employers and enterprises are engaged in the exercise. Otherwise, it makes it very hard for training organisations. So really, in the end, the key message for any training organisations, I don't think it matters where they live really, whether they're in India or Australia, that they have to understand the businesses that they are servicing. And as my managing director tells me all the time, you've got to be able to demonstrate that you're making a difference. If you can't demonstrate that, you're on a short end of the straw, and it won't be long before you won't be around any longer. So it's a very pragmatic approach, but that's what drives what we do. Thank you.
Thank you, Alan. I have a small request to the audience. If you permit, we can continue for another 20 minutes so that our speakers also get a chance and we can have some discussion. you like to use the PowerPoint? We have Diane Booker now. She is the Director Policy